it's Miss Parrott coming to you from medieval Europe. Well, not really. This is still my dining room, but we decided to play with the green screen for this YouTube video. So we are in YouTube video number 9, and today we are focusing on medieval Europe. And we're focusing on chapter 4, which is in a link in Google Classroom, all about medieval life. So that is what we're going to focus on today. So we have talked about the feudal pyramid, and that was really created to help after the fall of Rome in the late 400s AD and to help kind of rebuild society. And today we are going to talk more about the High Middle Ages. So you'll see in the feudal pyramid more of a rise of the craftsmen and the merchants in the towns. And this growth really was 2 reasons for the growth of medieval towns. One was there was the surplus of food because of more advanced farming methods. And secondly, we have these trade routes, and that from the trade routes, the stops on them become these cities. So trade becomes more popular, and we have the rise of the cities. So at first, these cities, these towns, were under the king's domain, the lord's domain. But with time into the High Middle Ages, these towns wanted to have independence. And so they would create a town charter. And this would help them to be able to govern themselves, as well as to have their own laws, and they could have a town council and a mayor, and if there were any peasants or serfs who had run away and established residency in these towns, they were now free. Now, since you have the rise of the merchants and the craftspeople, you do have the rise of guilds, which were groups kind of like unions to help to protect each other. And within these craftspeople, so there would be, like, for example, stonemasons, they would have their guild, or the cobblers would have their guild. So every type of craft would have their own guild to protect each other. So it protected, for example, it would control their pay and also the hours that they worked. And for this protection, the guild members would pay dues to the guild. And it even helped them, if they were sick, the fellow guild members would help them out when they were unable to work and to make money. Now, to be part of a guild, you have to be a master worker, and you start as an apprentice around the age of 12, and your parents might even pay money to the master to take you under his wing, and this could be both boys and girls. Girls not as often, but at the end of 7 years of working for this master, then you would have to prove that you were ready to venture on your own, and you would have to create a masterpiece to become a master. So more often than not though, these, instead of paying rent for their own place of business, they would have to be a journeyman. And that means that they would go around and travel by day to have business wherever, it would take them. Instead of, a master who would employ other workers. So you would be kind of on your own. So living in a medieval town, it was very unsanitary. There weren't things like garbage pickup. People just threw their garbage out the windows. You would have garbage and all kinds of, gross stuff that would get into the water. So, these conditions led to a lot of diseases, which we're going to talk about later on. So even if you're living in a town or out in the country or even in a castle, your main source of heat and also for cooking your food was fire. And that was, how everybody lived at that time. It just is a matter of how big of a space you had, or if you were in a crowded condition. The other thing is going to the bathroom you were to use, even in castles, is basically like a privy where you have a hole that you would use. Either for castles, it was inside the castle, but for most people, it was outdoors. So those were some of the living conditions in the Middle Ages. So I mentioned earlier the unsanitary conditions of the medieval towns, and it did lead to diseases. And some of the common diseases of that time were measles, cholera, smallpox, scarlet fever, and as most of you have read about, in 1347, the bubonic plague, or also known as the Black Death. And for treating a lot of these illnesses, diseases, the people would be using basically three main things: prayer, because as we know, is a very religious time, and we are going to be talking about the role of the church in a future YouTube video. And also herbs were used, and finally bloodletting. And this would be done with leeches or with a cut into the skin or numerous small cuts. And it was thought that this brought balance to rid the body of what they considered the bad blood or the diseased blood. So those were some of the practices of that time period. So the Black Death or bubonic plague, which many of you have already read about. Bubonic plague is the name bubonic, meaning bubos, which were the big bumps that were seen on the patients as they were suffering from this plague. And the doctors were very unusual, what we consider unusual, clothing at the time, very long beaked masks to help with, because there was such an odor that came from the patients, that they would put some sort of flowery petals or herbs at the end of that beak in order to help with the smell as they were treating the patient. And they also had, as you can see in this diagram, other things that would help them during that time. So to help protect them as they were treating their patients. So crime and punishment. So if you were accused of a crime during that time period, you would either have trial by combat or trial by ordeal. Trial by combat would basically be a fight to the death and for your freedom or your death. For trial by ordeal, it would basically be even more unusual, where your hands would be tied and you would be thrown into a well or into some sort of body of water. And if you drowned, then obviously you did not survive and did not earn your freedom. So many people died doing that practice, obviously. The other kind of punishment for maybe lesser crimes were the stocks. This was to basically have someone's hands, maybe feet too, and be on display for public humiliation in the town square, and sometimes for even, so that's for lesser crimes. For very severe crimes, there would be definitely some sort of hanging. So our last section today is about leisure and entertainment. And some of the forms of leisure were actually, some of the things that we do today: chess, checkers, backgammon, badminton, even. But there were some things that were a little bit more unusual. One, very unfortunate, was animal baiting. So, like during big events, celebrations, they would actually tie a bear or a bull even to a stake, and they would tie it like by their neck or their leg, sometimes even by a nose ring to this, a stake that was pounded into the ground, and then they would unleash these trained dogs that specifically would torture this poor animal at the stake. So that was a form of entertainment. Another thing that was popular at the time was what was called mystery plays. And these would be based on Bible stories. Sometimes they would be based on a saint and what miracle was performed by the saint would be acted out on the stage for in the town square for the public. So although there were some things that were, we know of today, there were a few things that were very unique to that time period as well. So hopefully this has been useful for today's topic on what life was like in the Middle Ages, and should help you with your time book. And if you have any questions, remember to email me anytime. You have your new student PPS emails, yay. So hope you enjoyed the green screen today. You can thank Ted. He thought I should try it out. So I will talk to you all later, and we'll see you for video number 10. Bye.